When people think of World War II, they often picture the battlefields of Europe, the islands of the Pacific, or the stormy beaches of Normandy. But few realize that one of the most important contributions to the Allied victory was born in an unexpected place, the city of New Orleans. This story begins with a determined and innovative boat builder named Andrew Jackson Higgins. Higgins was not a general or a politician. He was a businessman who ran a small shipbuilding company along the Mississippi River. His company originally designed boats for shallow waters, swamps, and marshlands, boats that could move through mud, land on sand, and navigate tricky riverbanks. These designs would soon change the course of history. During World War II, the United States military faced a huge problem: how to land thousands of soldiers, tanks, and equipment on enemy shores quickly and safely. Traditional Navy ships were too large and could not get close enough to the beaches. Soldiers were forced to jump into deep water and struggle through waves under enemy fire. The military needed a small, fast, shallow draft boat that could carry troops directly onto the sand. Andrew Higgins already had the answer. He redesigned one of his boats into what we now know as the Higgins boat, officially called the LCVP landing craft, vehicle, personnel. This boat had a flat bottom, could carry up to 36 soldiers, and had a special front ramp that dropped down so troops could run straight onto the beach. It was simple, fast, and incredibly effective. It became the backbone of Allied amphibious operations. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, later said, "Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us." Without Higgins boats, the D-Day invasion of Normandy, the largest amphibious assault in history, might not have been possible. These boats carried thousands of young soldiers through rough waters and straight into the fire of war. Because of this extraordinary contribution, historians and veterans believed that New Orleans deserved to be the home of a national museum dedicated to World War II. Historian Stephen Ambrose, who wrote about D-Day and the soldiers who fought in it, helped lead the effort. The museum originally opened in 2000 as the National WWII Museum. It showcased the role of the Higgins boats and honored the courage of the men who stormed the beaches. But the museum quickly grew. Veterans, families, and collectors began donating uniforms, letters, photographs, weapons, and personal stories from every part of the war, from Europe, Africa, the Pacific. In the home front, it became clear that this was more than just a D-Day museum. It was the story of an entire generation, so the name was changed to the National World War II Museum. It expanded into a large campus with multiple buildings, exhibits, airplanes, tanks, multimedia theaters, and interactive experiences. From a small tribute to a boat builder, it evolved into the nation's official museum of World War II. And it all started in New Orleans, not by accident, but because this city helped build the boats that helped win the war, and because the people here believed that the world should never forget the price of freedom. To understand why World War II began, we have to go back to a world still recovering from the last great conflict, World War I. The year was 1918 when the First World War ended, leaving behind broken nations, millions of dead, and an uneasy peace. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, punished Germany harshly. It forced the country to give up land, limit its military, and pay heavy reparations. Many Germans felt humiliated and angry. Their economy collapsed. Money became worthless. People stood in long lines for bread they could barely afford. Meanwhile, the world entered the Great Depression in 1929, a global financial disaster. Banks failed. Businesses closed. Millions lost their jobs. In Germany, the United States, Britain, and other countries, fear and hunger spread. People desperately looked for strong leaders who promised hope, jobs, and pride. In this world of uncertainty, a man named Adolf Hitler rose to power in Germany. He led the Nazi Party, a group that blamed Jews, communists, and the Treaty of Versailles for Germany's problems. Hitler promised to rebuild the economy, restore German pride, and create a powerful nation. In 1933, he became Chancellor of Germany. Soon after, he took full control, turning Germany into a dictatorship. He built a massive army, secretly defying the treaty's rules, and filled the minds of young Germans with nationalist propaganda. But Germany wasn't the only country preparing for war. In Italy, Benito Mussolini ruled as a fascist leader. He dreamed of creating a new Roman Empire and invaded Ethiopia in Africa in 1935. Meanwhile, in Asia, Japan was expanding rapidly. The Japanese military believed it needed more land and resources. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria in China. In 1937, Japan launched a brutal full-scale war on China, leading to horrific events such as the Nanjing Massacre across Europe and Asia. Governments grew more aggressive while many world leaders hesitated. Britain and France wanted to avoid another war, so they followed a policy called appeasement, trying to keep peace by giving in to some of Hitler's demands. In 1938, Hitler was allowed to take over Austria. Later, he was given part of Czechoslovakia with a promise that he would take no more land. But Hitler broke that promise. Finally, on September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France could no longer stay silent. They declared war on Germany, and World War II officially began. Soon after, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, while Germany continued its attacks across Europe. At this time, the United States tried to stay out of the war. Most Americans did not want to send their sons into another conflict thousands of miles away. President Franklin D. Roosevelt watched carefully but kept America neutral. However, the U.S. secretly helped its allies by sending food, weapons, and supplies. The world was now divided. On one side were the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan. On the other were the Allied powers, mainly Britain, France, China, and later, the Soviet Union and the United States. This was the world on the edge: starving economies, rising dictators, expanding empires, and a fragile peace that could not last. The stage was set for the deadliest war in human history. By the early 1940s, the war was raging across Europe, North Africa, and Asia, but the United States was still not officially involved. Many Americans believed the war was far away and wanted to stay out of it. President Franklin D. Roosevelt supported the Allies with supplies, weapons, and ships, but avoided sending troops. That all changed on one quiet Sunday morning. It was December 7, 1941. The sun had just begun to rise over the blue waters of Pearl Harbor, a U.S. naval base in Hawaii. Sailors were waking up, eating breakfast, and preparing for a normal day. Battleships like the USS Arizona, USS Oklahoma, and USS West Virginia were lined up in the harbor. Planes were parked wing-to-wing on the airfields. There was no warning, no alarm. At 7:48 a.m., the sky suddenly roared with the sound of aircraft engines. Hundreds of Japanese warplanes, launched from 6 aircraft carriers in the Pacific Ocean, appeared overhead. Torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighters swooped down with deadly precision. Their mission was simple: cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet before America could fight back. Explosions shattered the calm morning. Torpedoes slammed into battleships. Bombs dropped from the sky, tearing through steel decks. The USS Arizona was hit by a massive bomb that ignited its ammunition. Within seconds, the ship exploded, killing more than 1,000 men. Flames and thick black smoke filled the harbor. Some sailors jumped into the oil-covered water to escape the fire. Others ran to anti-aircraft guns to fight back, even as bombs fell around them. In less than 2 hours, the Japanese attack destroyed or damaged 18 ships, including 8 battleships. More than 2,400 Americans were killed, and over 1,100 were wounded. Aircraft bases were also struck, and hundreds of U.S. planes were destroyed before they could even take off. Back in Washington, D.C., President Roosevelt received the news. Shocked and saddened, he immediately called for action. The following day, December 8, 1941, he addressed Congress and the American people. His voice was steady as he said the words that would be remembered for generations. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. Congress responded in less than an hour. The United States declared war on Japan. 4 days later, Germany and Italy, Japan's allies, declared war on the United States. America, once hesitant, was now fully part of World War II. Inside the National WWII Museum, the story of Pearl Harbor is told through photographs, film footage, personal letters, and even pieces of the damaged ships. One artifact is a watch that stopped exactly at the moment of the first explosion. Another is a telegram sent from Hawaii to a worried mother back home. Pearl Harbor was more than an attack. It was a turning point. It united the American people like never before. Men rushed to enlist in the military. Women joined factories and training centers. Families hung blue stars in their windows to represent loved ones serving in the war, and gold stars if they never came home. The sleeping giant had awakened. The United States was now at war, and the world would never be the same. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States transformed almost overnight. A nation that had just emerged from the Great Depression now faced the greatest war in human history. Factories, farms, industries, and millions of ordinary people united with a single purpose: to win the war. This colossal effort became known as the Arsenal of Democracy. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had used that phrase to describe America's role, a country that would build the weapons of freedom not just for itself, but for all allied nations fighting against the Axis powers. Automobile factories that once built cars began producing tanks, jeeps, and military trucks. Ford's plant in Michigan, which used to make cars, started building a B-24 bomber airplane every 63 minutes. General Motors manufactured engines for tanks and planes. Shipyards along the coasts worked day and night to create cargo ships, destroyers, and aircraft carriers. Andrew Higgins' factory in New Orleans expanded rapidly, building thousands of Higgins boats that would carry troops to beaches around the world. Steel mills poured molten metal into molds for guns, bombs, and artillery shells. Farmers grew more wheat, corn, and meat than ever before to feed both soldiers and civilians. Oil fields pumped fuel that powered tanks, ships, and planes. Every corner of the country was part of the war machine. But this wasn't just a story of machines, it was a story of people. Millions of American men volunteered or were drafted into the military. They trained in camps across the nation, preparing for battles in deserts, jungles, and icy mountains. At the same time, women stepped into roles most had never been allowed to take before. With men leaving for war, factories needed workers. Women became welders, machinists, mechanics, and engineers. One image captured this new era perfectly. Rosie the Riveter, a strong woman wearing a red bandana, proudly flexing her arm under the words, "We can do it." She became the symbol of strength, determination, and patriotism. Life on the home front changed dramatically. Families received ration books that limited how much sugar, gasoline, butter, and meat they could buy. Rubber and metal were so important for the war effort that people collected old tires, aluminum foil, and even metal toys to be recycled into weapons and vehicles. Children held scrap drives, collecting anything the military could use. People grew victory gardens in their backyards, parks, and even rooftops to produce fresh vegetables. Posters, radio broadcasts, and movies encouraged Americans to save food, support soldiers, and stay hopeful. War bond drives raised money to fund the military. Celebrities, athletes, and musicians traveled across the country to entertain troops and promote patriotism. Inside the National WWII Museum, visitors can walk through a recreated American street from the 1940s. Neon signs glow above diners and drugstores. A radio plays big band music. Posters on the walls remind people to ration, work hard, and buy war bonds. It feels like stepping into the past, into the world of ordinary citizens who did extraordinary things. By 1943, the United States was producing more military equipment than all the Axis powers combined. Every minute, a new rifle was made. Every hour, a new plane rolled off the assembly line. Every day, new ships sailed from American ports. The arsenal of democracy was not just about manufacturing. It was about unity, sacrifice, and belief in a cause greater than oneself. America was now fully awake, fully engaged, and ready to fight across the world. By 1942, the war in Europe had reached a critical point. Nazi Germany controlled much of the continent. France had fallen. Britain was holding on but exhausted, and the Soviet Union was fighting desperately against the German invasion in the east. The Allies needed a plan to push back. Their first step would be North Africa. The North African desert became the stage for some of the most intense battles of the early war. American troops, many of them young and inexperienced, joined British forces to fight the powerful German Afrika Korps led by General Erwin Rommel, known as the Desert Fox. The sandstorms, scorching heat, and vast open terrain made warfare brutal and unpredictable. One of the first major battles for American soldiers was at Kasserine Pass in Tunisia in 1943. It was a harsh lesson. The U.S. Army suffered heavy losses, but they learned quickly. With new leadership, better equipment, and determination, the Allies regrouped and eventually defeated Rommel's forces. By May 1943, North Africa was under Allied control. It was their first major victory against the Axis on land. With North Africa secure, the Allies turned to southern Europe. Their next target, Italy, Hitler's closest ally. In July 1943, the Allies launched Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. Soldiers stormed the beaches while airborne troops parachuted into enemy territory at night. After weeks of fighting through rugged terrain and fortified towns, the Allies captured the island. Next came mainland Italy. In September 1943, Allied forces landed in Salerno and later at Anzio. Italy's government surrendered and removed Mussolini from power. But German troops quickly took control and continued the fight. Italy became one of the toughest battlegrounds of the war. The landscape of Italy, steep mountains, narrow roads, ancient towns made it difficult for tanks and vehicles to move. Soldiers had to climb muddy hills, cross rivers under enemy fire, and fight in freezing rain and snow. Some of the most brutal battles took place at Monte Cassino, where a historic monastery on a hill became a fortress for German troops. The Allies fought there for months, suffering heavy casualties before finally breaking through. Inside the National WWII Museum, this part of the war is brought to life with realistic dioramas, original uniforms, helmets, diaries, and weapons used in North Africa and Italy. You can see sand-covered goggles worn by tank drivers, letters stained with sweat and dust, and maps carried by generals planning their next move. The Italian campaign was long and costly. More than 300,000 Allied soldiers were killed, wounded, or went missing. But it forced Germany to fight on yet another front, stretching its army thinner and thinner. These battles in North Africa and Italy were more than military campaigns. They were stepping stones. They taught the Allies how to fight together, how to move men and machines across oceans, and how to plan massive invasions. All of it was preparing them for the most important mission of the war, the invasion of France, while soldiers fought across oceans and continents. Another kind of army mobilized at home, the American people. The National WWII Museum's Arsenal of Democracy exhibit is a tribute to factories, families, and everyday heroes who turned the tide of war without ever stepping onto a battlefield. Imagine the sound of machinery echoing through factories day and night. Women operating heavy equipment, sparks flying from welding tools, production lines rolling out tanks, jeeps, and aircraft at unimaginable speeds. This was not just industry, it was a national mission. The United States transformed from a country still recovering from the Great Depression into the world's leading war producer almost overnight. Women became the backbone of the workforce. Rosie the Riveter became a symbol of strength and independence as millions of women took jobs traditionally held by men. They built airplanes, stitched uniforms, inspected ammunition, and kept America's war machine alive. Meanwhile, African Americans, Native Americans, and immigrants fought for their place in the workforce and the military, breaking barriers despite facing discrimination at home. On the walls of the museum, you'll see ration books, war bonds, posters, factory tools, letters from loved ones saying, "We're doing our part. You fight, we'll build." These simple words carried the weight of an entire nation's hope. Children collected scrap metal. Families planted victory gardens to grow their own food. Celebrities traveled across the country to raise money through war bonds. Everyone, farmers, teachers, mechanics, movie stars, played a part in the effort. The exhibit brings these sacrifices to life with recreated factory floors, authentic vehicles, and real voices from history. Step inside, and you'll understand that winning World War II was not only about soldiers and battles, it was about unity, courage, and the strength of a nation working together. While Europe burned, another brutal war was raging across the vast waters of the Pacific. The National World War II Museum's Road to Tokyo exhibit takes you deep into this challenging and often overlooked theater of war, a fight defined by unforgiving jungles, remote islands, and an enemy that would not surrender. This journey begins on December 7, 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor. The museum immerses you in this moment of shock with real radio broadcasts, newspaper headlines, and artifacts from the devastated naval base. This was the moment America was thrust fully into World War II. From there, you follow the path of the soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen who fought island by island, mile by mile. It wasn't vast cities and farm fields, it was volcanic rock, malaria-filled swamps, towering mountains, and oceans that stretched to infinity. You'll walk through recreated environments, a sandy Pacific beach, a jungle outpost, the deck of an aircraft carrier. You'll see the gear they carried, the letters they wrote home, the photographs they took between battles. Every artifact tells a story of sweat, sacrifice, and survival. The museum pays special tribute to the Navajo code talkers, Native American Marines, who used their language to create an unbreakable code that saved countless lives. You'll also meet heroes like Admiral Chester Nimitz, General Douglas MacArthur, and the brave pilots who flew B-29 Super Fortress bombers on dangerous long-range missions. Battles like Midway, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa come to life in dramatic displays and interactive maps. You'll see the iconic image of Marines raising the flag on Mount Suribachi, a moment of hope in one of the war's bloodiest campaigns. But amidst the bravery, the exhibit does not shy away from the cost. Rows of dog tags, final letters, and stories of prisoners of war remind us of the human price paid in this faraway corner of the world. The road to Tokyo is not just a history lesson, it's a journey of resilience, strategy, and unwavering determination. A reminder that victory in the Pacific was earned one island at a time by men and women who refused to give up. As you move deeper into the National World War II Museum, the focus shifts from the Pacific to Europe, where the Allies launched one of the most daring operations in military history, the liberation of a continent. The Road to Berlin exhibit tells the dramatic story of how the world's most powerful armies came together to defeat Nazi Germany. The journey begins with the North African campaign. Imagine standing in the blazing desert heat where American forces first faced the German Afrika Corps, led by the legendary General Erwin Rommel. The Desert Fox. From the sands of Tunisia, the story moves to the mountains of Italy, where soldiers climbed cliffs, crossed frozen rivers, and fought village by village through towns like Monte Cassino and Anzio. Then comes June 6, 1944, D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. The museum places you right in the heart of the storm, on the beaches of Normandy. You'll see Higgins boats built in New Orleans, soldiers rushing onto the beaches under enemy fire, and the skies filled with paratroopers jumping into darkness. The sounds of explosions, the weight of gear, the fear and courage, it's all brought to life. Next, the exhibit takes you across the hedgerows of France, through the liberation of Paris, and into the snowy forests of Belgium, where the Battle of the Bulge became the last desperate German offensive. Soldiers fought in freezing temperatures, surrounded and outnumbered, yet they held their ground. Inside the museum, artifacts like combat helmets, frostbitten boots, rifles, diaries, and field maps make these battles real and personal. You'll hear the voices of veterans, young men who left everything behind to fight tyranny. As the Allies pushed into Germany, they discovered the horrors of concentration camps. The museum presents this with reverence. photographs, survivor testimonies, torn uniforms, and shoes left behind by prisoners. It's a sobering reminder of what this war was truly about: stopping evil. Finally, the journey ends in Berlin. The city in ruins, Hitler's regime collapsing, and the world witnessing victory but also the cost. Over 70 million lives lost, families broken, cities destroyed, but freedom restored. The road to Berlin is more than a timeline of battles. It's a story of courage, sacrifice, and the triumph of hope over darkness. As you near the end of the museum's journey, you enter one of the most emotional and thought-provoking sections, the closing days of World War II. This is where triumph meets tragedy, and victory comes with unimaginable consequences. In Europe, the war ended on May 8, 1945, V-Day, victory in Europe. Crowds filled the streets of London, Paris, and New York City, waving flags, hugging strangers, and celebrating the end of Nazi tyranny. Photographs and videos in the museum capture the joy: sailors kissing nurses in Times Square, families dancing in the streets, church bells ringing across the world. But while Europe celebrated, the war in the Pacific raged on. Inside the final missions and road to Tokyo concluding displays, you witnessed the last efforts to bring the war to an end. The island of Okinawa became one of the deadliest battles. Soldiers faced kamikaze attacks, civilians caught in crossfire, and entire towns destroyed. Victory came at a high price. Then came a turning point in human history. In a small room lit by dim lights, the museum presents the story of the Manhattan Project, a secret group of scientists working to create the most powerful weapon ever seen. Photos of laboratories, diaries from scientists like J. Robert Oppenheimer, and models of the atomic bombs Little Boy and Fat Man tell a chilling tale of science and war. On August 6 and 9, 1945, the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. The devastation was instant and unimaginable. Entire cities vanished in moments. The museum handles this with sensitivity, displaying survivor stories, burned artifacts, and haunting images that remind us of the human cost of war. On September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, Japan formally surrendered. World War II was over, but victory did not mean peace of mind. Millions of soldiers returned home, wounded, changed, or grieving. Refugees wandered destroyed cities. Nations faced a new world shaped by nuclear weapons and rising tensions. The beginning of the Cold War. This part of the museum asks visitors to pause and reflect. What did it cost to win this war? What responsibility do we carry now? The Final Days section is not just about the end of World War II, it's about the beginning of a new world. One built on lessons of courage, sacrifice, and the hope that such a war would never happen again. As your journey through the National World War II Museum comes to an end, you step into a space not filled with tanks or aircraft, but with memories, voices, and lessons meant for the future. This is where history becomes personal. The museum doesn't just preserve artifacts, it preserves stories. Stories of soldiers who stormed beaches, nurses who saved lives, factory workers who built machines of war, children who prayed for their fathers to return home, and prisoners who held on to hope in the darkest places on earth. Why does this museum matter today? Because World War II was more than a battle between nations. It was a battle for humanity. It was a fight against tyranny, genocide, and oppression. It shaped the world we live in, the creation of the United Nations, the beginning of the Cold War, the rise of the United States as a global leader. In a new age of technology, medicine, and diplomacy. Inside the museum, a quiet space called the Honors and Remembrance Pavilion allows visitors to reflect. Names of the fallen, photographs of loved ones, final letters home. It's a reminder that every statistic, every number, was a human life. The museum also looks forward. Education programs teach new generations about sacrifice, courage, and the responsibility of freedom. Interactive exhibits connect the past to the present, asking questions like, what would you have done? What can we learn from them? How will you shape the future? Outside, the American flag flies above the museum grounds. It waves not in pride alone, but in remembrance. And as visitors walk away, many look back one last time, not just at a building, but at a legacy, from the factories of America to the beaches of Normandy, from the burning skies over the Pacific to the quiet halls of remembrance in New Orleans. This is the story of World War II, a story of courage, sacrifice, innovation, heartbreak, and triumph. The National World War II Museum stands as a promise that we will remember, that we will honor those who fought, those who died, and those who lived to tell their stories, and that we will never take peace and freedom for granted. Thank you for taking this journey. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so others can discover this story too. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and never forget the past that shaped our future.